In this video, I'm going to show you how to read the documentation that normally comes with a Java class. To begin with, we need to find an example of documentation, so I'm going to look for the documentation for the math class that comes as part of the Java standard library. To find the documentation, I'm going to search for Java 11 math, so that's just the documentation that comes with Java version 11. It doesn't really matter which version of Java you're searching for. If you just type in Java Math, you'll often get the documentation for Java version 7. Again, it's not really that important for the purposes of this course. Clicking on the link takes you to the documentation page for the class Math. Near the top of the page, you'll see the name of the class. Above the name of the class, you'll see the module and package information. The module information is not that important to us for this course. The package information is important, so it's important that you understand that the class Math is in the package java.lang. There are many other classes that are in that package that we'll be using in the course. If you continue reading, you'll see the full declaration for the class Math, which reads, public final class Math extends object. There's a lot of information there that we're not ready for yet in this course, but we'll get there eventually. After the class declaration is a description of the class. So the first sentence starts with, the class Math contains methods for performing basic numeric operations, which is essentially telling the reader that the class Math is intended for computing mathematical functions. There's then a lot of extra information, which can be intimidating for a new Java programmer. You shouldn't be intimidated. The information's not intended for new programmers. It's intended for other programmers who really need to know the information that the documentation is trying to tell them. At some point, you should probably read what the documentation is saying. But for now, we can skip past that and go to the next section. And this section is called the field summary section. So if a class has publicly available fields, there will be a section in the documentation that summarizes the fields. So here you can see the class Math has 2 fields. In the summary section, there's only a 1-sentence description of the fields. Right, so you can see that the field pi is the double value that's closest to the mathematical value pi. To the left, you'll see the modifier and type of the field. So here we've got the type as double. We've seen that before. We know that means it's a double precision floating point number. We see here that the field has the modifier static. Now, what that means is that to use the field, you need to use the name of the class followed by a period in front of the field. So over in Eclipse, I have a little main method that I'll be using throughout this video. Let's use the value of pi. So we'll just print it out to the screen. Okay, so to get to the value pi, I need to use the name of the class. So that's math, followed by a period, followed by the name of the field. I can save that and run that, and that should print out the value of pi, which it does. Right? So it's 3.14159, and so on and so on and so on. You'll notice that the fields are both HTML links. So if we click on the field, that takes us down to a section called the field detail section, which includes more information about the fields. Now, what you don't see is the actual value of the fields. If you want to see their values, you have to click on the constant field values link, which takes you to another page that contains the information that we're looking for. So the constant field pi has the value 3.14159, and so on and so on and so on. So if we go back to the field detail section, and then back to the summary section, you notice that you can get to those using the links here. Right? So to go to the field summary section, I just click on that link there. And then we can continue to the next section. So the next section is the method summary section. So in this section, you'll see every method that's publicly available and a 1-line description or 1-sentence description of what the method does. To the left, you'll see a summary of the modifier and type of the method. So if you see the modifier static, that means you need to use the name of the class in front of the method. If you see a type here that's not void, that means that the method returns a value. So in this case, the ABS method returns a value of type double. Right? So ABS is the method that returns the absolute value of a number. And you see here that there's actually 4 different versions of the ABS method. The different versions differ in the arguments that you pass, the type of the argument that you pass to the method. So let's try out the ABS method. So I'm going to print the absolute value of a negative number. So let's say negative 1.5. The absolute value of minus 1.5 is 1.5. So if I save this and run the program, I should get 1.5, and I do. Again, notice that the every method name in the summary section is a link. So if I click on the link, it takes me to the methods detail section, where there is more detailed information about the method. Right? When you read the detail section, you'll see that the parameters are documented at the bottom. Right? So it tells you what this value A is supposed to be. Right? So it says the argument whose absolute value is to be determined. And then it tells you what the return value is. Right? So in this case, it tells you that it's going to return the absolute value of the argument. If you take the time to read the text of the documentation, you'll see there's actually quite a lot of other information here. There's what happens in the special cases of positive 0, negative 0, infinities, and not a numbers. There's even some extra information here that tells you there's actually an efficient way to implement this method, which is quite unusual. So let's go back up to the method summary section, and let's just scroll through the methods quickly. There's a method called acos, so that's the arc cosine. A method called asine and atan for the arcsine and arctangent. A method called cbrt for cube root. cos is cosine. exp is e raised to the value a. Log is the natural logarithm of the value a. Log 10 is the base 10 logarithm of the value a. Sin is the sine of the value a. Tan is the tangent of the value a. There's a method called 2 degrees that will convert a value in radians to degrees. And there's a method called 2 radians that will convert a method from a value in degrees to radians. You'll notice I skipped over a lot of methods, and there are a lot of methods in the class, right? So the class math has a lot of methods that a new programmer won't really understand what to do with, right? And that's fine, right? The class math is made for everybody, not just new programmers. And there will be people who need some interesting or advanced mathematical functions that a novice programmer normally wouldn't use. POW is another method that's you would commonly use. So that's the value a raised to the exponent b. Okay, so let's look at a different class now. So let's go look at the string class. So you can find a string class from the documentation by typing in the search box. Now the trick is you need to know what the right string class is, and that happens to be the one that's at the top. But you'll see that there's a lot of other classes that involve the name string. So part of the trick of learning how to read the documentation is to actually know what classes it is that you want the documentation for. Clicking on the link takes you to the documentation page for the class string. Above the name of the class is the module and package information. Notice that the string class is inside the package java.lang. Below the name of the class is a section called All Implemented Interfaces. We're not quite ready to use this information yet, but we will be in a little while. What this section is trying to tell you is that a string has all the capabilities of these 3 things here. If we then go on to read the description of the class description tells us that the string class represents character strings. All string literals in Java programs, such as ABC and double quotes, are implemented as instances of this class. So what that's trying to tell you is that you can make a string variable s, and you can set it to the value ABC. More precisely, you can make it refer to the string object ABC. The description then goes on to tell you that strings are constant. Their values can't be changed after they are created. So what that means is over here, this string ABC, the letters in that string are forever A, B, and C. I can't change them. You might think that that's not very useful because you can imagine lots of situations where you'd want to make a string and then change the letters in the string. But the documentation goes on and tells you that string buffers support mutable strings. If you continue reading the description of the class, you'll eventually get to a section called See Also. And normally in this section, you'll see classes that are related to the class that you're looking at the documentation of. So you'll see here there's a string buffer and a string builder class, and these two classes are the classes that you would use if you want a string whose contents you can change. Now, if you keep on reading, you'll see that there's a field summary section. So the string class does have a field called case insensitive order. Its type is unusual, right? So it's a comparator and then string inside. We're not ready to use this thing yet. This is an example of a generic type. We'll get there eventually as well. And then if you keep on reading, inside a class, inside most classes, there'll be a constructor summary section. So a constructor is the thing that you would normally use to create a string. To create an object. So for example, I could create a string using a constructor like so. So S2 is a new string. So in this example here, the variable S2 also refers to a string object called ABC. And I've created that object using a constructor. The string class is unusual in that you almost never write, or you almost never create a string using a constructor. Normally you create a string by using a literal, or you call some method that returns a string. If you continue past the constructor summary section, you'll end up at the method summary section. So in the string class, you'll see that there are, a lot of methods again, right? Similar to the math class. If you look at a method, let's say carat, over in the modifier and type column, you'll see that the modifier static is not here. So what that means is to use the method carat, you need a reference to a string. Right? So what does the carat method do? Well, this says it returns the car value at the specified index. Well, let's click on that to see what it really does. Right? So the method carat returns the car value at the specified index. It tells you that an index ranges from 0 to the length of the string minus 1. The first car value of the sequence is at index 0, the next at index 1, and so on, as for array indexing. So it's trying to tell you that a string is a lot like an array. The first character in the string ABC is at index 0. Second character is at index 1, and the C is at index 2. And apparently this method carat will give me the character at a specified index. If you continue reading the documentation for the method, you'll see that there's an extra section here that we haven't seen before. So there's a section here called throws. And this section here tells you that it will throw an exception, in particular an index out of bounds exception, if the index value is negative or not less than the length of the string. So let's try this method out. So this is the method returns a car. So let's make a variable of type car. The method is not static, so the static modifier is not here in the method header. So to call the method, I need a string reference. So let's use the string reference s. Right? Then you type a period. then the name of the method that you want to use, and I'll use an index of 0. So I think, after reading the documentation, that should give me back the character at index 0, which is the A. So let's just confirm that. So if I've read the documentation correctly and I've interpreted the documentation in the right way, this should print out the letter A. And it does. Let's try to get the second character. So that'll be index 1. And let's print out that value. Right. I think that should print out the B. And it does. Let's print out the C as well. So that's the character at index 2. And yeah, that works as well. And now let's try to intentionally get an exception to be thrown. So this tells you if the index is negative or not less than the length of the string. So the length of this string is 3. So I think if I try to get the character at index 3, this is going to throw an exception. Let's try that. So save and run. And indeed, it does throw an exception. Right, so it prints out the A, the B, then the C, and then when it gets to this line here, we get the string index out of bounds exception. Right? And it even tells you that the string index is out of range, right? The number 3 is not a valid index. So let's remove that, because if I leave that in, I'll never be able to write any more code after that line. Let's go back to the summary of the methods and see what other methods are in this class. Some of these methods you'll notice you won't recognize, for example, the return type. So the method here, cars, returns an int stream. So this is actually using a feature of Java version 9. Which is called a stream. And these things are very powerful, but it's not clear that we'll actually have time in the course to talk about them. So for the time being, anytime you see something like int stream or some other type of stream, you can ignore that for now. Of course, you can go and do some research on your own and find out more about them if you like. There's a method called, oops, sorry. Let's take a look. So there's a method called length. Let's find the method length. Right there, and that returns the length of the string. So I think the length of the string ABC is 3. We can just quickly check that. Right, again, notice that there's no static modifier for the method length, so I need a reference to a string to call the method. This method has no arguments or no parameters, so I need to use the empty brackets after the method name. So if I print out the length of the string, that should be 3 if I've read the documentation correctly, and I have. That's good. There's another method here that returns a stream of strings, apparently. So again, that's another method that you could ignore for now. Right? And there's a lot of other methods as well, right, which you can see. So there's an entire notebook on strings that has examples of how to use many of the common methods in this class. Okay, so let's take a look at how to navigate the documentation in some different ways. So if we go back up to the top of the string class, you'll see that the package and module information, those are both links as well. If you click on the package link, that will take you to the documentation for the package java.lang. And when we get to the documentation for the package java.lang, it tells you that this package provides classes that are fundamental to the design of the Java programming language. The most important classes are object and class. String is another one of the more important classes. If you scroll down past the description, you'll find a section called the interface summary. We'll discuss interfaces a little later on in the course, so for now we'll skip past that. And then we'll come to the class summary. So here is where the documentation will list every class that's in the package. So you see the classes Boolean, byte, character. Let's look for the ones we've already used. There's math. And there is string down here. And if you click on one of these, that will take you to the documentation for that class. So that's another way to navigate the documentation structure, is to find the package that the class you are interested in is in, and then look at the documentation for that package. If you look at the module documentation for the class math, that will take you to the module that holds the class math. So that module happens to be called java.base, and if you scroll down through the documentation, you'll see the list of all the packages in java.base. And java.base is the module that contains the foundational APIs of the Java platform. So one of the packages you'll see is the package java.lang, and there's a lot of other packages as well. We won't have time in the course to use more than 2 or 3 of these packages, but one of the other packages that we'll be making heavy use of is java.util. And the util package contains the collections framework. So these are things like lists, sets, and maps. Map is what you know as a dictionary from Python. And there are several other miscellaneous utility classes that are useful as well. So for example, if we go down to the class section, the class arrays is a class that contains various methods for manipulating arrays. And the class collections contains methods that operate on or return collections. That completes this video. So at this point, you should be able to find the documentation for the Java standard classes, and you should be able to read the documentation for the various classes.